welcome to Language Monk and his Random Thoughts. I had in separate episodes discussed have to, must, should, ought to and had better. So now we'll include all of them together and see what is the difference, how these differ when used in language. There are subtle differences. Let's delve into that and see how we use those modal verbs as we call them. First, I have discussed earlier have to and must. Have to is an external compulsion. You have no other way than to do it or act. For example, as I had said earlier, if the income tax people call you for a scrutiny, there's no other way, you have to go. It's not you must go, it's you have to go. While if your mother calls you, it's more of you must go because it's your conscience. You want to go. When mother calls, you go. So you must go. So what compulsion arises from within? Use the modal verb must. Where the compulsion is from outside and whether you want it or not, that has to be done, you have to do it. So that's the difference between have to and must. For example, one small example, I have to get my passport renewed before the end of this month because I have to go abroad in the first week of next month. So here it's a question of have to. It's something which you have to do because you have to go abroad. Wherever you're working, you have to go next week. So by this month then, you have to get the passport ready. Suppose you're applying for a passport with the intention of going abroad sometime later. You want to go on a tour, maybe after a month or 2 months or 3 months, there's no deadline. Then you can say, I must apply for passport because I expect to go for a picnic or for an overseas tour sometime within the next 2-3 months. That's why you use must. Then should. For the same passport, I should apply for the passport at the earliest. That's a statement. I need a passport, so it's my duty to apply for it at the earliest. I should apply for the passport at the earliest. It's something which I have to do. I should not delay it. But there is no threat attached. But when you say had better, there is some threat. So if my friend tells me, you had better apply for a passport immediately, otherwise you can't go abroad next week or next month. So there's a threat. You had better apply for the passport immediately so that your trip abroad won't get delayed. It's had better. It's not like I have to. Have to is something which you have. If you don't do, something external is going to affect you. Here, it's not anything external, but I had better apply for the passport, otherwise I might not be able to go abroad in time to join my job or whatever it is. That's the difference between should and had better. Now ought to, there is some difference in ought to because there is an element of morality involved. Because it's not just that I should go for my friend's wedding, but if the friend is very close and it's your moral obligation to go for the wedding, it's not fair if you don't attend. Then the better word to use is I ought to go. I should go, yes, ഞാൻ പോകണം. I ought to go, അത് എൻ്റെ moral responsibility ആണെന്നുള്ളൊരു ധ്വനി അതിൽ വരുന്നുണ്ട്. That's the difference between should and ought to. You can use both, but then you are adding a bit of moral responsibility, a tone of responsibility when you say I ought to. That's the difference between should and ought to. Had better, there is an element of threat, some repercussion, some consequence if you don't do it. Then you use I had better or you had better. I should is just a responsibility, nothing more than that. I should, it's something which I should do. And when I ought to do, it means there is an element of sentimentality or moral responsibility. So you can choose the right word for the right occasion. Now there is something else, should have. I should have or I ought to have. Should have means something which happened and which probably I did not do rightly, I did not do it the proper way. I should have done it in another way. Then you use the word I should have. And I ought to have is the same thing, except that again that element of moral responsibility, a tone of moral responsibility is attached when you use I ought to. I ought to have looked after my mother better. I should have looked after my mother better is fine. But when you say I ought to have looked after my mother better, that means there is some moral, you can say remorse. The remorse which you express when you didn't do what you should have done, what you ought to have done. Actually, even there I should have used that. When you didn't do what you ought to have done, there is a remorse in your tone. Then you use the word ought to. So should have and ought to have. So that's it. That will conclude the modal verbs which we use in different circumstances. I hope you have gone through that. Please look into my earlier episodes, individual episodes for each of these or each pair of modal verbs, and you also go through this and make sure that you use the verbs correctly. So till next time, wear your mask, wash your hands frequently with soap, keep a safe social distance, stay fit, stay healthy, and keep smiling all the time. Bye.